Today we're doing something a little bit different. I've been saying that a lot lately, but this is like seriously different.
These might be family members, these might be friends that think these things, go unchallenged, and then feel so bold that they can say it on the internet.
Whatever. You marry who's right for you, and that's all that matters. And anybody listening, you don't have to answer to anybody else.
Timed out perfectly with like having quite a bit of success on social media. I decided I want to give this the shot that it deserves.
I was very fortunate in that either of us ever had issues on either side of our families. They were very inviting, and it was kind of smooth for us. Did you have to deal with any of that?
There is this expectation that Black people, and Black women in particular, are supposed to like turn down the volume, are supposed to mute themselves, are supposed to make themselves palatable for the majority. Why is that the expectation?
What's up, everybody? We're back for another episode. Welcome. And today we're doing something a little bit different. I've been saying that a lot lately, but this is like seriously different. We're talking to an influencer, podcaster, cancer survivor, and former radio personality. He went viral with his video popularizing the Black wife effect, which is a trend where the Black wife will help her husband up his game and enhance his look. And so he also hosts a podcast with his wife, Dominique, called the Playing House Podcast. I've had a chance to check that out. A lot of laughs on there. So do check that out as well. And they talk about interracial relationships, parenting, and life in general. Please welcome Kolter Bouchard. Kolter, what's up, man?
Mike, it's such a pleasure to be here. Virtually, of course, because that's 2024 after all. Thanks so much for having me on today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. No, it's great to have you here. And we were able to connect via mutual connection, Matt Kundle.
So I want to
give Kundle a shout out. Kundle rules, man. He knows like everybody. So like I reached out to him because I saw some of your stuff online, and my wife actually suggested it to have you on as a guest. And I thought, hey, I know he's got a radio background. Maybe Matt will know him. And then of course Matt's like, yeah, I just talked to him yesterday.
Matty,
like that's how Matt is, man.
Absolutely.
Like he knows everybody. He's like, if I want to get Drake on my podcast, he'd be like, yeah, he was just at the house the other day. You want me to introduce you guys? I'll shoot you a quick text.
I think given the current climate, maybe you don't want Drake on the podcast, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe not so much right now, but.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, man. So you got your start in radio. Tell me about that.
So it's actually where I met my wife, was in broadcasting school. We met at Ryerson University, which is now Toronto Metropolitan University. What's interesting is that they changed the name of the school, but did not get rid of the student debt. And I feel like if you're going to get rid of one, you should have to get rid of the other. But that was like 15 years ago. That's nuts. Now,
wow.
I just wanted to do radio. I had the blinders on. I'm like, radio, that's it. Anything with a camera, miss me with that. She only wanted to do television. And it was an interesting time in the Canadian media market, which is a sentence that I don't think anyone has ever said in the history of time, interesting in Canadian media market. But Oprah had just launched a network, OWN. It had just come to Canada. And it was just like, it was a really, really cool time for especially specialty cable. And so she was really excited about this and wanted to be the next Oprah. Or I guess wanted to be the first Dominique. And we both kind of just had these blinders on. And then we graduate a couple of years later, and I get my first job in Dawson Creek, British Columbia, which just truly a place that should not exist. It, I think, just got running water in the color red. It's kind of a rough place. And I'm sure we'll talk about this later in the episode, given the theme of it. But and incredibly, like, people are actively racist in Dawson Creek. And I know that's the case in every, place on planet Earth, but just like, it was almost like a sport for some people. And so we're there for a couple of years. We moved to Dubai afterwards. I got the job offer in Dawson. Dominique got the job offer in Dubai. And it was a kind of tit for tat. And so we go from like a market that was 50 below to a market that's like 55 degrees in the summer. It's so hot. Yeah. And then we come back to Toronto after a couple of years, and I just celebrated at the end of 2023 a decade in the industry, which is nuts. And then shortly after that, mostly due to stress, mostly due to just like, I want to say life satisfaction, but almost like lack of life satisfaction. And it timed out perfectly with like having quite a bit of success on social media. I decided I want to give this the shot that it deserves. I want to really lean into this and you mentioned Matt Kundle, and a lot of people in the radio industry are like, well, you've left and you're completely switching careers. And I feel like this is more of like an evolution, more of like a graduation. I feel like I'm turning from Charmander into Charmeleon, right? It's kind of an evolution in a sense. And not only was I able to quit my job earlier this year, but my wife was able to quit hers. And for the last 2 weeks, both of us have been working full time for our company. We've grown it now to a team of 5, which is amazing. And I'm really excited about the present, really excited about the future, and really
That's
excited to
awesome.
connect with you today.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And so what was your wife doing? She was in broadcasting when she quit her job too, or?
No, she's got sense, and that's why I love her so much. She avoided broadcasting from the moment we graduated, and she actually worked in digital marketing for the
Okay.
last 10 years, which makes sense because our company's called Simul Creative Incorporated, and we've kind of got 2 major streams of revenue. We've got the influencer side of it, brand deals, partnered posts, like audience engagement, stuff like that. And then we also own a full-scale video production company. And so we work with some of the clients that we do partnered posts with, that we do influencing with. But we are both now, our careers are kind of converging. Our skills are kind of converging because we're very much still doing digital marketing, which is her forte for the last 10 years. And we're also doing on-camera stuff. And we're doing, hosting stuff, which has been my forte for the last 10 years.
That's awesome. And you guys clearly are evolving yourselves, like, starting off in broadcasting, kind of get your feet wet as far as, getting behind a mic, getting on
Yeah.
camera and those different things. So, I mean, clearly this was meant to be because things are coming together for you guys. And that's great, man. And you and I got a lot in common. We talked about this off camera, but I, like you, have a black wife. How long have you guys been married now?
Well, I've never been married to your wife, but I've been married to my wife coming up on 10 years. It'll be 10 years in January, which is nuts. We got married at 23 and we've been together. I mean, I spotted her, and
Yeah.
like, I joke about this all the time. I'm like, kind of like a stalker, but not like a stalker. It was very much stalking. I saw her we had a creative writing class on Thursdays, and like, I wasn't able to work up the courage to talk to her for a while, but I would like see kind of where she sat. And then the next week I'd go like, oh, she sat kind of like there last time, so I'm going to get a seat over there. Or if she was already in the class, I'm going to I don't want to sit next to her because I don't want to totally creep her out, but I want to be like proximity. I want to be close so that I can like crack a very well-timed joke
Yeah.
and try to get her attention. And then I had a dorm, so I lived on campus and she lived about an hour away from school. And so I was like, listen, if you want to come over and like study, and it worked. It sounds like a cheesy whatever, but it worked.
Yeah.
And 15 years later, here we are. But when we got married, again, we were 23 years old. We had no money. Our entire wedding cost $1,000. That's like the wedding license. I got our hotel room. I got 2 nights at a hotel on Groupon, dude. That's how long ago this was.
Wow.
And that included we got our outfits at Winners. I think the American equivalent would be like TJ Maxx, Marshalls.
Yeah.
And like, I've got cufflinks off Craigslist. I got a bow tie off like Facebook, whatever was Marketplace before Facebook Marketplace. And I tried to get, and you got to remember, this was early 2015. Rob Ford, the late crack smoking mayor of Toronto, he had been beaten in the previous election. I think maybe he was still mayor or he was like still a councillor or something like that. I reached out to his office and I asked if he could officiate the wedding because like he, as mayor, certainly had like special powers or whatever, but his team said that he was unfortunately too busy. Now we know what he was up to. Now we know what he was doing. He couldn't
Yeah.
officiate my wedding, but it was such an exciting time. And then a couple of months later, we moved to Dubai. And the first year of our marriage, I feel like and we talked about this the other day, I feel like it was a lot more tumultuous maybe than a lot of people's initial, right, the training wheel year of marriage. Because even though we had been together for 3 or 4 years, and even though we had lived together for a couple of years before that, I feel like expectations really changed. We were also like, again, 23 years old, moving across the world, didn't have therapists. Like, it was kind of a perfect storm, but we weathered it. So that's good.
Yeah. So, and marrying someone from another race can sometimes create obstacles like acceptance from family members on either side or even social circles. I know myself, I was very fortunate in that either of us ever had issues on either side of our families. They were very inviting and it was kind of smooth for us. Did you have to deal with any of that, either of you?
No, the only issue that her family has is with my cooking, which is why I'm not allowed to cook. I'll bartend. We go to a family function, I'll bartend, I'm making drinks for everybody. That's, I think, how I like got in there so well. They're like, "Oh, homie
Yeah.
he can't cook, but he can cook behind the bar." We're happy with that.
Yeah.
We grew up like 20 minutes away from each other. I grew up both in the GTA. I grew up in Whitby, Oshawa, and my wife grew up in Scarborough, which is a borough of Toronto. And then we both went to school in Toronto. So like we grew up so close to each other. Our families are stocked full of very kind, funny people, and we never really had an issue with that. But I think just like growing up so differently, right? I mean, my in-laws immigrated from Grenada in the early 1980s, whereas my family is French Canadian. They've, it's
Mhm.
like the last couple of generations have all lived mostly in Northern Ontario. That's where my parents met. But it was a lot of different things. A lot of and maybe they're little, maybe they're not. I don't want to downplay anything, but like her growing up in an apartment with she has three siblings. I've got one sibling, and
Mhm.
I grew up in a two-parent household. She did not, and so it was a lot of differences like that that I think when you add them all together can make not even like familial relationships difficult, but I think it can make connecting on like an individual level with your significant other. I think that can make that a little bit difficult sometimes. And so it's been a constant journey. And
Mhm.
I say that like it's been an exciting journey to like fully learn who another human being is. And you don't have
Yeah.
to be from different racial backgrounds to experience this thing. I mean, if you're from different socioeconomic backgrounds, for instance, if you come from a family that, maybe you're the first person in your family to attend and complete post secondary education. And maybe the person that you're with, like, they just come from a long line of doctorates. So, like, that can be kind of incongruent, I think, sometimes for people. And I think at the end of the day, and every person's different, every couple's different. I think if you can like see the human being, and I think if you can celebrate not just what you have in common, but also like really celebrate the differences that you have and find commonalities within those. I think that
Yeah.
that's the secret to a successful relationship. Also, therapy. You each need a therapist, and you need to see a different therapist together.
Is that what you guys do? You guys see therapists
Hundred
together and you see
percent, hundred
Really?
percent. I got a buddy. So him and his girlfriend, they each see a therapist, and it's the same therapist. And then they see a couples therapist, and that's also the same. Like it's this this person's making bank. And I'm like, yeah, I feel like you need to like some compartmentalization. You need to keep some secrets from each other. And maybe the collective, the communal therapist, not super, impartial, but
Yeah.
if it works for them, it works for them. And again, I mentioned like everybody's different, every couple's different. You have to find what works for you. You have to like I shouldn't say you have to. I think that there can be great success in breaking the mold and in shedding those like expectations, right? You talked about like, are your families accepting? Of course, absolutely. We're both incredible people and we're even more incredible together. Who wouldn't like us? But we're raised a certain way, we're conditioned a certain way. And that conditioning, I think, is the way that you're conditioned, I think, is by your parents, is that's predicated on the way that your parents were conditioned by theirs. And like it's kind of turtles all the
Right.
way up, I suppose. And so you need to find what
Yeah.
fits for you and your relationship.
Right. And I mean it's great that you guys have, a system that works for you. Now
Mm.
what if I can ask, what motivated you guys to do the therapy? Is it something you agreed on from the beginning? Was there some issues that you guys felt you had to work out? Like what started that process?
So we've talked about this here's a shameless plug. We've talked about that on our podcast, Playing House. I feel like almost every episode lately, because I think there's still a great deal of stigma associated with certainly couples therapy. I think that there's less of a stigma around like, I want to work on my own personal BS, but there's still a lot of stigma associated with, oh, well, like if we're seeing a therapist together, like that means we've got some serious issues. And
Yeah.
that was my point of view. Like, have you ever seen like a therapist individually or together? And if you're not comfortable answering that, I get it. But have you ever like confronted that stigma maybe, or like asked yourself, why do I feel like this about this?
I have seen a therapist in the past. I don't right now. I'm a member of a church, so I mean, right now, if I ever had something spiritual I was battling or personal, I'd probably turn to like a pastor or like elder at my church. Um, I find that in church environments, there's less stigma attached to that, but I know exactly what you're talking about. So, like in a non-church setting, there's definitely a stigma, and my wife knew I was going. I was going individually for a bit, but I didn't really tell a lot of people because there was that fear, right? I know exactly what you're talking about.
And it can be difficult to overcome that, right? Because you don't want people to think that you're broken. But at the end of the day, like, what is broken? And the answer is all 8 billion of us on Earth.
Yeah, big
And
time.
seeing a couples therapist, like, this is how I explain it to people. You don't get the oil in your car changed because the engine exploded, right? You get the oil
Mhm.
changed in your car so that the engine doesn't explode, or like the car just runs a little bit better. And so, yeah, like we've, as any couple has had, we've had, when I say flare ups, I don't mean like we're not yellers, we're not screamers, we don't raise our voice at each other. There's always respect, there's no name calling, but you have acute instances of strife maybe sometimes in your marriage. Like it pops up and it's things that maybe are just like, that have compounded over years, or it's maybe something that comes up out of the blue. I think going to therapy together is a way for you to realign yourselves. I think going to therapy together is a great way to have conversations that you might not necessarily without a couples therapist, because you're in this situation where you've got to confront a lot of like ugly things about.
Yeah.
And it's some people might think, and I certainly did, that like you go to couples therapy and this person's a referee and it's going to be contentious and you're going to be fighting a lot. And this person's going like, "No, I decree that you are correct." And in my experience, it's been the complete opposite. You're going to couples therapy and you're looking inward a lot, and you're going, your therapist will ask like, "Well, why do you feel like that? When your significant other did this, why did you react like this?" And like, there's that, cliche that it always goes back to childhood. It all goes back to childhood. And I mentioned that a moment ago, like the way that you're conditioned, the way that you grow up has a profound effect on who you are as an adult. And like the relationships that you witness growing up, or the lack of relationships that you witness growing up, can really contribute to how you bring yourself to a relationship. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's great when you can have separate therapists, but you're on that same journey because I think there's such thing as the wrong therapist and the
Mm.
wrong type of therapy.
You got to
And
date
so if you've
around.
got
You got to date around.
yeah, stuff like that, right? Or um trying to redefine what the roles might be in your house that works for you guys, like different things, right? So it's important to find therapists that align if you guys are seeing therapists separately. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
And there's another element of it. I think you need to have, specifically if you're in an interracial relationship, I think you need to have a therapist with certain cultural sensitivities, right? Like it was important to us to find a therapist that was a woman of color, because there's going to be a lot of blind spots that I have
Yeah.
that Dominique doesn't, because she is a woman of color and she's a black woman. And I mean, we could be together for 75 years. And I was going to say, hopefully, let's at 50, I think at that point we go like, let's maybe shop around a little bit, let's maybe trade up to a newer model. But I think that you can be with someone forever and it's impossible to understand every single nuance about that person. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it keeps things fresh and exciting. But I I want to make sure that if we're going to be spending the $200 an hour, and the money secondary to the time, if we're really invested like this, really invested in this like we are, I think it's important to make sure that you're, I said earlier, like shopping around or comparison shopping or whatever, but like finding a therapist that works for you and finding a therapist that can relate to both people in the conversation, that can relate to
Yeah.
both people in, and bring up things that maybe like like me, for instance, that is still like ignorant, that I'm being ignorant of something, like I'm not being totally aware of something. And also there's a ton of homework you have to do in between sessions, right? Like you mentioned seeing someone before. There's like it's you can go to the doctor, right? Your family physician, if you can get one, and you have your quarterly checkup, your animal checkup, whatever. And the doctor's like, all right, so it looks like your cholesterol's super high and you're going to have to work on that. And then you could just do nothing and you go back to the doctor the next time and the doctor's going to be like, hey, I told you about the high cholesterol and you did literally nothing about it.
Yeah.
What you're actually supposed to do is go home and get some Metamucil or I don't know, whatever people do
Yeah.
with high cholesterol to lower it. It's the meeting with a therapist, whether it's an individual therapist or a couples therapist. I feel like that's 10% of the work. Like there's all of the hours in between sessions. Like that's on you.
Yeah, it's the application of it,
Mm.
right? It's not just the discussions in that office, but
Mhm.
it's what you do with that. And it's interesting that you guys, chose a woman of color just because there are cultural sensitivities that you have to be aware of in an interracial relationship that might not apply in, relationships where people are of the same heritage.
Sure.
That's something you really got to acknowledge in order for that to work, because there can be misunderstandings and there can even be like tensions in that if that's not something that's addressed. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. And it's there needs to be so much more trust in a relationship where you've got some distinct, like every relationship needs to be built on trust, every successful one. But there's a lot of trust required in a relationship like this, where my wife needs to trust that if she calls me out on something, that I'm not going to play the victim, right? That I'm not going to get
Yeah.
defensive. And if my wife goes like, "Hey, we were at a party, or we're currently somewhere, whatever," and somebody said something off color, like in the past, and again, we started hooking up when we hooked up like as a relationship, but I guess also started hooking up, in our
Mhm.
late teens at university, and I think it's real easy to dismiss because we're so like conflict averse, right? As human
Yeah.
beings, it's
Yeah.
easy to dismiss what she's feeling as like, oh no, they didn't mean it like that. You're being crazy, which is gaslighting,
Yeah.
and it's important that when my wife calls me out for something, when my wife says like, "Hey, we were somewhere and somebody said something," that I don't get defensive, that I take her word for it, especially if it's something that I've said, and I make good on that. I go like, "Damn, I'm sorry that I did that. You're absolutely right." And here are the steps that I'm going to take to make sure it doesn't happen again. The other side of that is I trust that I can ask my wife anything, right? I can say like, hey, is this, if I, especially when it comes to the content that I put up on TikTok and Instagram and the content that we do on the podcast. I mean, the podcast, she's there for it, so she can call me out in real time.
Yeah.
But I get comments all the time that are like, oh my God, like, does your wife have Instagram, or it's a good thing, your wife doesn't see these videos? And it's like, oh, do you think I'm posting a single thing without my wife seeing it ahead of time and without my wife going like, yeah, this is okay, we can do this? Like, absolutely not. I'm not insane. And also the content that I do where I'm talking about interracial relationships and I'm talking about like, I'm a white man and I'm married to a black woman, that I'm the butt of the joke if there's a joke to be made, or like I'm punching up, or even content that includes my kid, for instance. And I don't do very much of that. But if I'm talking about like, here's how my daughter was roasting me, for instance,
Mhm.
it's me that's the butt of the joke. And I think that that's important as well when you're coming to a relationship like this, as the white person in an interracial relationship, and especially as a white man in an interracial relationship. Like you've got to have a thick skin. You've got an immense
Mhm.
amount of privilege, and it's up to you to not only share that privilege with your significant other, but eliminate. Let me rephrase that. It's not about sharing your privilege with somebody else, because that doing that inherently like maintains the privilege structure, right? Not to turn this into the woke Olympics or anything, but if you've got privilege, it's up to you to use that to extend your platform and to make sure that you are making things better for each successive generation, right? That you are
Mhm.
calling out your own privilege, you're calling out the privilege of people who look like you, and you're doing everything in your power to make your, like, you want to talk at like a micro level, to make the your significant other feel like valued and loved. Do you know what I mean? Like create safe space, create the ability to be soft, create the conditions in which to be vulnerable. Like
Yeah,
that's being a good partner.
for sure. And you mentioned white privilege, hot, contentious topic these days. people get called out for their white privilege, but I do think that a lot of white people are unaware of that until somebody points it out to them.
But that's also white privilege, right? Like to not have to be aware of
Yeah,
that because you're not faced with it every day. Like
true.
and it's difficult, I think, for a lot of people to understand. And it gets back to that defensiveness part, right? Like
Yeah,
to say, oh, well, you've got white privilege. And people, you hear this all the time, right? And it's like, well, I've worked for everything I've had. And it's like, yeah, I'm not doubting that. Or like, I'm
yeah,
not being actively racist to people. Like, okay, sure.
yeah,
But you've never, as a white person, yeah, like listen, life is hard for everybody. But as a white person, especially as a white man, you don't have those extra barriers that people of color, and you want to talk about like intersectional feminism, especially women and like people of color who aren't or don't identify as cis straight males, right? Like you I think maybe for a lot of people, it's a difficulty to believe the lived experience of others, or to believe that any experience that is not your own is valid, and
yeah,
that's privilege, right? Like to not
yeah,
have to face that all the time, to like be in a little. It's interesting that the folks who decry people wanting safe spaces, right? Calling other people snowflakes, ironically, have been living in safe spaces their entire lives. Ironically, are the biggest snowflakes when it comes to being called out for their own behavior, because someone who truly abhors snowflakism and a person who truly abhors safe spaces would go, yeah, it's open season, baby. Call me out for anything. I've got a thick skin. I've got confidence. I know that I'm doing the right thing. So, like, that doesn't bother me. And it seems to be quite telling that it's the opposite.
yeah. And it's that awareness that we're talking about, that I've had situations in my life where, I didn't see something happening until somebody pointed out to me. And I'll give you
Mm.
a story. When I was in college, most of my friends in college were black, and most of my classmates in the program I was in were white. But my best friend in that class was black. So at the end, at graduation, we had a big house party. Everybody in the class was invited. And it's the first time we ever drank with these people. And some of them got drunk, and some of them started making comments. My black friend was a big dude. He could throw down, and they started making comments about his bald head,
Who
and it
started
just
making
started.
comments? The white
the
people?
white the white people started making comments about him, and they were starting to get to a weird place, and they were drunk, and it's like the
Mm.
filter had been removed, and he got really uncomfortable, and he grabbed me and he said, "I need you to get me out of here. I'm going to end up in jail tonight."
Damn.
And so we literally just left. Like, it was very abrupt, but we were out of there. And I was like 19 or 20. And it was one of those like eye-opening moments in my life where I saw it. They were just making remarks, and like it was getting close to, like, if we stayed long enough, who knows? They might even have dropped the N-word. Like, I
Mm.
don't know. But it's weird how, like you say, you can't live other people's experiences. So when you're in your bubble or you're in your world, you can't see what other people experience until they kind of let you behind the curtain. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, 100%. And it's so much easier to believe the lived experiences of people who look like you, right? If you were faced with, okay, well, a black woman you're like, I'm a white man, obviously. A black woman is telling a white man something, and then a white man is telling a white man something, or a white woman is telling a white man something. Who is the average white man more likely to believe? And it's an uncomfortable reality, but like everybody has inherent bias. Everybody has like an internal, and I think that the average white man would be more likely to believe the average white man or white woman over a black woman, for instance, or a black man. I think that that's just the reality. And so that's where that privilege comes in, right? Because the privilege is not having to address that. The privilege is not having to come to terms with that, because you are part of the majority that is in power. And it takes some real balls. It takes some real balls to do what is truly the bare minimum, funnily enough, which is just acknowledging the factual reality of the situation, which is you are as a white person, and especially as a white man, you are afforded certain chances that other people are not. You're given the benefit of the doubt way more than people are who don't look like you.
Now you guys have a little girl. You mentioned her
We do,
earlier,
yeah. She's starting
and
kindergarten in September.
wow,
Yeah,
wow, that's a fun season of
yeah.
parenting. So how do you guys deal with racial issues with her? I know she's still young, but do you consider her black? Do you consider her biracial? How do you guys navigate that?
It's interesting. We talk about it very openly in our home, and we're very fortunate that the daycare that she goes to, it's because it's a real knife fight out there to get daycare spots. But she's been in there for coming up on 2 years. They actually had their graduation ceremony yesterday, even though daycare's a few more months until school starts. But they're at daycare very like it's also run by a black woman.
Mhm.
And so like the book choices, they're always promoting books, especially by authors of color, and featuring like characters and pictures of people of color. And they're very open about it. They're very encouraging about it. The dolls, for instance, that they have, the action figures that they have are diverse. And so it's great. I'm 33, my wife is 33. And certainly even when we were growing up, like the dolls you could get, like if you wanted a black doll, for instance, like that was a specialty item, right? Like you'd really
Yeah,
have to hunt for one of those, and they were way more
yeah.
expensive
Mhm,
versus white, like you just the dolls you got were just white dolls.
mhm.
Whereas now, I wouldn't say that it's anywhere close to equitable, but like you go to Toys R Us, you go wherever, you're seeing a lot more. Even just like on a level of kids' toys, you're seeing toys that are more representative of the kids that are playing with them. When it comes to how do we identify our daughter, I mean, ultimately that's going to be up to my daughter as to how she chooses to identify, right? Maybe maybe she'll say, identify as black, or I identify as white, or I identify as multiracial, biracial, I identify as mixed race. And there's a great book, by the way, I recommend this to a lot of people. It's called The Mixed Race Experience. It's written by these multiracial twins, and I say multiracial intentionally because that's how they identify, these
Mhm.
women in the UK, and they talk to people with mixed racial heritage and people all over the world. It gets back to everybody's an individual. Everybody chooses to identify a different way. At first, we said, well, she's black because Dominique's black, and that's how the world views her. And then it got into a larger conversation about, I think it was called the one drop rule, where historically, like if you had even an ounce of black blood in your veins, you were considered like the white privilege was taken away from you.
Mhm.
And that graduated to, well, she's not half white and half black because she's a whole human. So she's
Yeah.
black and she's white. And again, she might choose to identify as one of those, all of those, a few of those, a different combination of those, and that's up to her. And the best thing that we can do, and the thing that we are going to continue to do, is to arm her with as much information as possible and to create as safe and vulnerable a space as possible to have these conversations.
Yeah. And there's going to be more and more people in the world like her, in my opinion, because I don't know if you've seen it where you
Hopefully
are,
not. She's
but
very
like,
loud and she has way too much energy, and it's 9:30, Nia. I need you to go to bed.
well, like I say that because like interracial datings seems like it's at an all-time high now. I mean, I've been married 24 years. So I've been in that world for a long time, but I
Sure.
didn't see it around me as much as I see it now. And I always had eyes for it because I was in it. So I think it's something that's becoming more common. And I'm seeing a lot more white men with black women. I
Mm,
hardly ever saw that 10, 15 years ago. Are
yeah.
you seeing that a lot too?
I think so. And this is going to sound counterintuitive, but I think I am seeing it more because I'm noticing it less. Like when we started dating even 15 years ago, we get a lot of comments in public, and we still do sometimes, but we get a ton of comments in public, a ton of looks. And that's like downtown Toronto, right? That's like one of the most diverse places on planet Earth, and
What
supposedly
kind of
one of the most
comments? What
progressive
kind of
people. Pardon me?
comments? What kind of comments? I'm
From people
curious.
of all backgrounds, men, women, black, white, comments
Disapproval?
like, pardon me?
Disapproval?
Disapproval, comments like, why are you with a black woman? Why are you with a white man? Still, we'll get people, I'm sure you've gotten this over the years. You go on a date together, and then you get the separate checks at the end. Now, maybe your finances are set up a little bit differently than mine, but even if you have separate bank accounts, which we don't, we've always had a joint checking account.
Yeah.
Even if you had like a separate bank, what are you going to go 50-50 with your partner when you're out for a date? Like, we're clearly on a date. Like, she slapped my
Yeah.
ass on the way into the restaurant, and you think this is what, like a work lunch? Give me a break. So it's those like It's those little microaggressions. That's redundant. It's those microaggressions of people just assume that how could you be together? Or people assume that, well, there's no way you could be in a romantic relationship together. And I don't think it's intentional all the time, but like it still stings, Still
Of
sucks.
course. Yeah. And it's funny that you say that. I didn't think Toronto would do that now. I haven't been there in many years now, but Dawson's Creek, I've never been there, but or Dawson Creek, right? I'm mixing it up with the TV show. It's Dawson
again,
Creek, right?
the TV show had, I think, some black people in it. Dawson Creek, I think it was just my wife.
Really? And so there's but obviously it was worse than Toronto. No?
It was a lot more in your face. Maybe, I mean, you can look at voting records, for instance, and you can look at, voting records, I guess. And you can tell that Toronto's, more of a liberal place or more of a progressive place than northern British Columbia on the border of Alberta. But it's a lot more in your face there. And it's also a much smaller place, right? Like things are a lot more apparent. And it sucked. It sucked. And as much as it sucked for me, people were insulting me because of my association with a black woman. People were insulting her because she's a black woman. Like I can walk around the rest of the day if we're not together, and I have that white privilege of people not assuming something that they think is negative about me, or not having a bad thought about me, or not treating me differently because of my proximity to blackness. But like that's a skin that Dominique can't take off, right?
Yeah.
And why should she have to? Like there seems to be this, not seems to be. There is this expectation that black people and black women in particular are supposed to like turn down the volume, are supposed to mute themselves, are supposed to make themselves palatable for the majority. Why is that the expectation when like white people don't have to change and white men certainly don't have to change?
Yeah.
Why is the pressure on them?
Yeah. And how long were you guys in Dawson Creek when you realized we got to leave here?
An hour? No.
Was it like really early on? Because you were there, what, a year and a half?
Year and a half, yeah.
And
Dominique left after about 9 months, understandably. And it was difficult at the time because I'm like, why are you leaving me? It's my career. I'm trying to make it work. And she's like, I cannot do this anymore. Nobody's hiring me. That's another thing. Nobody's hiring me. The station where I work, get this. So we both have 4-year undergraduate degrees from what is apparently and allegedly the finest broadcasting school in North America. We had like 5 or 10% of our class were like people like people from the United States coming here to Toronto because this is apparently such a great program. And it is.
Yeah.
And so I worked at a radio station, it had a TV station there. They were hiring a videographer. And my wife, the summer before we had moved to Dawson Creek, because we moved there in like winter, right? Like the coldest and worst it's going to be. She had shot a documentary in the Dominican Republic and Haiti, and they did not hire her. And I asked the general manager, I was like, why not Dominique? Like at the end of the day, you hire who you're going to hire. It is what it is. They went with an internal candidate with less experience than my wife did. And the reasoning was, well, what journalism experience does she have? And it's like, my brother in Christ, she was in Haiti shooting a documentary. Like, what is not newsworthy about that? She's got a 4-year, I think the people they went with, and this isn't to take a dump on people with college diplomas, the student debt that I've still got, I wish I went to college. I would have had a 2-year head start on my career. But on paper and in reality, Dominique had way higher qualifications than the person that they hired, and they went with somebody else instead. They went with a white guy instead. Now, is that the only reason they went with this person? I'm not in the program. I'm not in the general manager's head. I don't know. I'm not in anybody else's head. I'm not going to speculate on somebody else's motives. But like, if you see a situation like that and you're going, oh, we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt. Why are we giving them the benefit of the doubt on that? Like, I don't understand that.
Yeah. Especially if you're seeing like a continued pattern of inappropriate behaviors just around town and how people might be treating her and how outward you said it was. There's only so much of that where you realize, okay, this is not where I want to be.
It just eats away at your soul.
Why she bounced. What's that?
It just eats away at your soul. And again, like, I don't have to deal with that all day. She has to deal with that every waking moment of every day. And it's going to be
Yeah.
worse in some areas, and it's going to be slightly, I'm not going to say better, but like slightly less worse or slightly more hidden in other areas. But we really need to have like an international maybe conversation about this, about the realities of white supremacy, the realities of systemic racism. But when you say those words to people, when you use those phrases with people, they immediately clam up. They immediately get defensive because they go, "Why are you attacking me? I worked hard for everything I have." And
Mhm.
and I'm a firm believer in meeting people where they are and speaking the language that somebody else speaks, because as soon as you come at somebody, if you're coming at somebody like perpendicularly, if you're broadsiding somebody, they're immediately going to get their defenses up. They're immediately going to get their guards up. I'm not saying that you have to like hoodwink somebody into coming over to your side, but if you're really trying to convince somebody, and there's a great book called The Persuaders. I forget who wrote it, but it's got a yellow book jacket on it. It talks about the most successful ways to persuade somebody to bring them over to your side. And a constant theme is you got to meet them where they are.
Yeah.
You got to it's baby steps. You're not going to convert somebody overnight. And some people you just can't convert, right? Like some people, I'm not saying they're a waste of your time, but like maybe they're a little bit of a waste of your time. And if you can get somebody to like agree with you, maybe 80, 85, even 75%, I think that that's pretty good. And it comes back to what I said earlier about that trust of my wife trusts that if she brings up something that I've done or something that has happened to her, that I'm not going to dismiss her and that I'm going to believe her and that I'm going to work on it. In the same way that I trust that if I need information, if I want to double check something, if I want to make sure that I'm not even not offending somebody, but I'm making sure that I'm always practicing, that my content's always inclusive, that my content's never punching down, or that like, is it okay to say this? Is it okay to do this? And again, we've been together for 15 years and we built up that trust, but I can trust that she's not going to like humiliate me for asking those things, that she's not going to get defensive, that she's going to reciprocate that trust. And I think that it's incumbent upon people in the majority, so in this context white people,
Mhm.
the internet is free. Well, you have to pay a subscription to it, but like there are so many free resources out there on the internet. There are so many books. There are so many people who even like look and sound like you that are trying to desperately to give you this information. And there's this expectation that like, again, in this context, well, like, why can't I think a lot of black people and people of color, racialized people, marginalized people, have been in a situation where they've heard, well, if from a white person who has said like, oh, well, if I do something, just call me out on it, because like the last thing that I want to do is offend you. And what that does
Yeah.
is that puts the emotional labor on that other person. And what that
Right.
essentially is saying, what that person essentially is saying is, I'm going to continue to act recklessly and without any regard for you or your feelings or your humanity. And if you don't like something, you're going to have to bring it up to me. How many like in offices, how many superiors, how many like bosses have said that? How comfortable is a subordinate employee going to be bringing up something to your boss, right? Especially
Yeah.
you want that promotion, you want that raise. You just want ease. You just want to be left alone at the office. And suddenly like now I have to police my boss. How's that going to look at promotion time? Right?
Yeah.
How's that going to look when I just want
Yeah.
to like live my life as a human being in this office, or like family
Yeah.
members for certain people, or like friends for certain, like just people in the world. Like nobody wants to do that work, but we need to do that work. And there are so many resources available. I've mentioned, I feel like a ton of them in this conversation already.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's people, wanting to be able to acknowledge it and address it. And one thing people who are in the majority, white people in this case, should also understand is that like whatever happened throughout history, it's not your fault. So you don't have to get defensive,
Mm,
but do things to try to be an instrument of change where you see something weird going on. So if you see a marginalized person being treated a certain way. Not that you have to step in and be a hero and get killed in every situation. It's obviously situational,
Sure.
but like be part of the solution and not part of the problem.
Don't
If
make
that makes
anybody's
sense.
life any harder than it already is. Like, number one, it's
Yeah.
like what did doctors say? First, do no harm, the Hippocratic Oath.
Mhm.
It's like you said, you don't need to be a hero. You don't need to you don't need to put yourself in direct physical harm every moment of every single day. But like, you
Mhm.
got to do the work. You've got to confront your own privilege. You've got to seek out the resources. You've got to you got to give a little to get a little. And also, to your point about, you're not responsible for historical injustices. Yeah, but you're the beneficiary of historical
Mhm.
injustices, right?
Mhm.
Why is the net worth of white families 10 times more on average than the net worth of black households, black families? And it's, well, for a long time, black people weren't allowed to buy homes, and they certainly weren't allowed to buy homes in quote unquote white neighborhoods. No, not
Yeah.
even quote unquote, in white neighborhoods, because it was against the law. And certain like homeowners associations would have covenants that would say you couldn't even sell your house when you leave to a black family.
Yeah.
And so, and this is one example, but it's a very big example where the largest driver of household wealth is a home. If you can buy a house and you pay off that house, the house is going to, in most cases, and we've certainly seen that in Toronto over the last couple of years, the price of your house, the value of your home will outpace inflation. And that's the biggest single driver for familial wealth. And when you're locked out of that for decades, for centuries, and then you finally join that, it's easy to say, well, like there's no discrimination, there's no housing discrimination now, which is not entirely true.
Mhm.
Well, okay, when you've been locked out of that system, how has your family been able to generate intergenerational wealth? Well, they
Yeah.
haven't been. And so you're the beneficiary. You, on average, having a household net worth 10 times more than someone who looks different, than someone who has a different color skin than you, well, you're absolutely benefiting. And it's through no hard work of your own. It's through happenstance.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, on a lighter note, let's talk about the black wife effect. Now, you did a video talking about your appreciation for your black wife, and it took off. So
Well, my appreciation
tell me
for my
about that.
wife and my appreciation for the things that she has done to make me a better human.
Hey, I can resonate with that. My wife has done the same for me, in undescribably amazing ways. But
Yeah, I want to see some old pictures, Mike. Come on.
yeah, I'll get you some. I'll email you some. I promise.
Please. Thank you.
But like, tell me about that. That just took off. Did you have any idea that would take off the way it did?
The black wife effect is real. Okay, this is something that needs to be studied in universities. I don't believe in much, but I believe in the black wife effect, and soon you will too. This is me before I met my wife. I look like if Machine Gun Kelly was anemic. I look like Water Gun Kelly. Who parted my hair? Moses? And how do I look like a little boy and an old woman at the same time? Like, this should be an illegal build. Enter the black wife. Which I do every chance I get. You can't tell me that's not a miracle. You can't tell me that's not an improvement. What? Do you see this? Call me a leaky ceiling? Because I got the drip. This one's just a thirst trap. I'll give you a sec. Dude, night and day. And I'm not just talking about our skin colors. The black wife effect? Give it the Pulitzer. Give it the Nobel Prize. Give it an Oscar. Give it a Tony. Make it an EGOT. Fucking black wife effect. So this is actually a big week. We're recording this mid-June. I just surpassed 700,000 followers on TikTok. I'm at 330,000 Instagram followers. And so combined, and then we're working on Facebook, we're working on YouTube, but I crossed 1 million followers, and I'm just under 1.1 million followers across all platforms. I started posting on TikTok about 2.5 years ago. We started the conversation talking about radio. And there's been this certainly no inflationary creep when it comes to salaries, but there's been an inflationary creep when it comes to responsibilities. And when I started in the industry, it was, well, you post a blog post once a week. And then it was, okay, well, a Facebook post, and then Twitter comes around. And okay, Twitter, and then you add Instagram, and you add all these different platforms. And so I was just posting videos on TikTok that I was already making for the station anyway.
Mhm.
Or maybe it wasn't the same ones I was posting on the station socials, but like I was already making content anyway. And so I would post it. I started a TikTok account and started posting, and like took off right away. I think my third video ever has like 8 million views or something like that. And I was
Wow.
talking about reasons my toddler threw a tantrum.
Mhm.
And as I've been talking about my family and as I've been like sharing more of my life, it's just my presence online has been growing. My audience has been growing. And that's an audience that I take very seriously. The Black Wife Effect is, when did I post that? Maybe like a month ago? Something like that. That one really took off. Like I've had other series that have really taken off. But the content lately where I'm sharing, you know, I'm a great storyteller, and I think that that's why my audience is attracted to my content, and that's why they're sticking with me, and that's why they are super supportive. I've got a great audience. It's talking about my marriage. A lot of people really resonate with that. I don't think that there are a ton of people having frank, honest conversations like you and I are right now. And I've also got a very engaged audience. I've got about 30, my engagement rate's about 30% on a video. On account of my size or accounts of my size, you're looking at an engagement rate of maybe like 5 to 8%. So just like knocking it out of the park. And it's because people are commenting. It's because they're sharing it. They're going, I've lived this experience as well. Or like, I know exactly what you're talking about. When we talk about like making content that really resonates, I try to make eye contact with my audience at all times, whether it's like literally in person, whether it's on camera, whether it's in like in the in me responding to captions, for instance, or comments, for instance, or like in the caption on a video. I want to make sure that if you are watching my video, I want you to feel seen. And the Shade Room picked up this video, which the Shade Room's got like 29 or 30 million Instagram followers. I've seen it I know it's really popular when it makes it over to Twitter, which I'm not active on. But if people are reposting it on Twitter, I'm like, okay, this is clearly got a little bit of traction.
Yeah. Yeah. And so tell me about it, man. Like it's how has the Black Wife Effect upped your game?
That's very kind of you to say that I've got game at all. I appreciate that. That's very generous. And you said you went to church. That's very, I think, Christ-like of you, Mike. I appreciate that.
Why, thank you, Kolter. Hey, I mean, 700,000 followers on TikTok. Obviously, something's clicking, right?
Doing something right, I guess.
Yeah.
Talk about the Black Wife Effect. My wife is a Black woman, and I think that I think that some people, because I see a ton of comments that are like, that's just the wife effect, or like, what about the white wife effect? I think there's and I keep saying this over and over again, everybody's different, every relationship's different. My relationship is different than it would be with a white woman because my wife is a Black woman and I'm a white man. Like our relationship you would be different with someone who's from any other kind of background. I think not just like people use this expression, I'm exposed to other cultures. I love that her family is my family. I love that my family is her family. Not like from an incest kind of way. Listen, I'm white, but I'm not that white. I love the things that I get to experience that I might not have been able to otherwise. My in-laws, like I said, are from Grenada. And last year, my wife and I, this was our second vacation ever in 15 years, by the way.
Wow.
God, we got to go on more vacations. We went to Grenada. She had never been. I had never been. And it was really like, and her mom surprised us last minute, was like, I bought tickets too. Like, amazing. But that day, we spent one day in Grenada with going around with her mom and meeting family members that she had never met before. Like, that was the best day of the trip because we were able to I feel like I got maybe like a fuller picture of who my wife is. And I feel like my wife got a fuller picture of who she is and where she comes from. And I feel like now being able to clap on the 2s and 4s, like that's been a real challenge for me for years. And that's on my LinkedIn, Mike, being able to clap on the 2s and 4s. That's a big thing for me. I think that's probably the biggest effect. Still can't dance, but I'm going to blame it on cancer. I had some immunotherapy, which is like the only thing that ended up beating cancer for me, in addition to the stem cell transplant. But like, I don't have a ton of great movement left in my hands and feet and my joints in general. And so I'm like, oh no, listen, she tried her best, but it's the medication. That's why I can't dance properly anymore. But I think it's being exposed to like, again, it's just like this urge to say like exposed. It's being, it's getting to have experiences that you might not otherwise have. It's also being taught that like, hey, maybe we moisturize after we bathe. And maybe when we're bathing, we wash our legs and our feet. And maybe We also bathe like a second time at night because like you get sweaty and dirty throughout the day. And maybe like we also moisturize that time as well, you know? And maybe we try a little bit of seasoning in our food sometimes.
Yeah.
So I think that, you know, you see like this, if I may, rizzing up of people, of white guys in particular that are in long-term relationships with Black women. And I think that it's due to a couple of different things. I think that number one, it is challenging to be in a relationship, not because of the person that you're with, but because of the societal reaction to the person that you're with and the fact that you're in a relationship with them. And so I think that it takes some balls to wear that proudly on your sleeve, and I think that it takes some balls to not get defensive and to acknowledge your own privilege and to call out the privilege of others. And so I think that you're more open to new experiences, and I think that it takes a certain kind of person to like fully embrace that. And so like this increase in Riz, I think the potential was there, and I think it was finding the right person to unlock
Yep.
it.
And I know exactly what you're saying. I mean, I'm in a similar relationship, and it's a different dynamic. It's not a slam to any other kind of woman. It doesn't, you know what I mean? We're not doing
No,
comparisons
it
here.
doesn't take away from anybody
No, I
else.
mean, whatever. You marry who's right for you, and that's all that matters. And anybody listening, you don't have to answer to anybody else, and either should you and I. And I mean, there's just certain things that my wife in particular has enhanced my life. Like I won't go clothing shopping without her. I just won't, because she just helps pick the right things, the right combinations. I'll always check with her. Hey,
Learn
I'll
from
just
her, Mike.
yeah, for
You're
real.
making a Black woman do unpaid labor. Mike, how dare you? You're part of the problem.
Oh man,
Cancel this guy.
cancel
Cancel this
me.
guy right now.
I'm done.
Guys, your toast. That's it.
But yeah, that I think that's important for people to understand, and they blow things out of proportion and take things out of
Mm.
context. And you know, when you put this video out, it wasn't. I'm positive. Your intention was not to demean any other woman or any other type of wife.
No.
And so people have to just understand that. So I wanted to put that out there so nobody gets the wrong idea. But I know you got pushback from people who expressed their disapproval of this trend. Am I right?
100%. And like it's a very vocal but very small coterie of people. And it's the snowflake crowd. It's the safe spaces, participation ribbons. We call everyone under 60 a millennial crowd.
Yeah.
But also it's like you're seeing some young people in there. You're seeing it's not just white people, it's not just men, it's not just women. It's I'm seeing comments there from everybody. I listen, I can't read all the comments because there are literally not enough hours in the day. If I get a video and it's got, 25,000 comments on, I can't read every comment.
Right.
But like I see what's being I see the comments that are being liked. I was going to say upvoted. That's Reddit. I see the comments that are making their way to like the top of the comment thread or comment section. And I'm seeing the new ones as they come in. And there are a lot of people who say like, and it's just like, it comes across so dumb. And I go like, are you trolling? Is this legitimately how you think? And as frustrating as it is, and like downright maddening sometimes. It's also like it just comes across so goofy.
Yeah.
It's like these people who, by the way, have no profile pictures, or like the profile picture is like a meme or something like that, or it's got like Russian, like the bio's written in Russian or something like that, where you're like, oh, this might be from like a bot farm or a troll farm or something like that.
Yeah.
But people online, especially without a profile picture, especially using a name that is not theirs, are so brazen. These are people that I doubt would say these things in public when people can see what they look like, can see where they work. There was this one guy, I'm not even going to say his name, but there was this video that I released it did really well on Instagram. And I didn't release it because I thought it would do really well, but I had reposted it from TikTok, and it was me calling out someone that had said, what did he say? It was something like, no one gives an F that you can't attract a white woman. And I just addressed that. And I didn't call out his appearance. I just posted the comment.
Okay.
And you could see his profile picture in there, and you could see his name in there as well. And before I did that, I wanted to make sure that this wasn't like a scraped image, meaning like someone had just taken it from a stock image site or it was somebody else. I looked up the person. This person had a business. I did not publicize the business. I was very clear in telling people not to attack this person. I was just saying, for anyone who doubts the comments that I'm getting, these are the comments that I'm getting. And this is fairly mild, I think, compared to a lot of the other ones. It doesn't excuse it, but like, listen, everything's on a spectrum. Sexuality is on a spectrum. Autism's on a spectrum. I think dumb comments, hurtful comments, also on a spectrum.
Yep.
And he owned a business. I forget what he even did. Who knows? And this is a real person who was brazen enough to post this online and like got burnt, deleted the comment, but my video with the picture of the comment was still in there. And these are people that like walk among us, right? These are people that you might work with these people. These might be clients of yours. These might be family members. These might be friends that think these things, go unchallenged, and then feel so bold that they can say it on the internet. It's like these guys that, and it is always men, that they'll get super loaded and they'll approach a woman who is on camera. She's a journalist, and they'll say, in the P. And then people track down where they work and they lose their jobs, and people are like, oh, well, they were just drunk. They just made a mistake. No, they think they have ownership over this other person's body. They think that they are suzerain over the people, the members of the human race who do not look like them. Like they're able to lord over these people. Right. And they think that, well, this person might be more, I think that people who make these comments are threatened, is what I'm trying to say. And it's an easy way for them to, and this, I think there's a Lyndon B. Johnson quote in here somewhere, something like, you can take like the lowest white man, like the poorest white man, and as long as you can convince him that he's better than even the most educated black man, or that he's better than a person of color for just by virtue of being white, then that emboldens that person, then that empowers that person. And it makes that person think that like, well, my life might kind of suck, but at least I don't look like you. So get a lot of that.
Yeah.
And I call it out. I think it's my job to call that out.
For sure, man. Like social media, you know, it has its positive aspects, but clearly there's, it brings out the worst in humanity too.
Sure.
And clearly you've seen that a lot more than most people, just given your profile online.
And I seek it out. I truly seek it out. I don't mean like I put my family in harm's way or anything like that. But I have a platform and I've got privilege, and I'm going to use that to call that out.
Where can people find you?
You can find me by Googling Kolter Bouchard gray sweatpants, and that's going to take you exactly where you need to go. Kolter Talks, Kolter with a K, across all socials. You can find me and my wife on our podcast. We release new episodes every Monday. It's called Playing House, and it's shot on this set. It's a very beautiful set, which my dad helped me build. I mentioned my dad earlier, my family, and just like how great they are. My dad was over earlier this week helping us with, Mike and I were talking about this before we started recording. We have been like improving the studio, and my wife and I are now running this company full time. And it's really cool to like be able to like hang out with my best friend and work with my best friend, and most importantly, fool around with my best friend. So listen.
No, it's a blessing, man. I love the purple curtain too. It's a nice touch.
Thank you.
It's got this sign of like royalty, right?
Thank you. And I'm certified white trash, so I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, if you're in an interracial relationship, those of you listening, how do you feel about the black wife effect? We want to hear from you guys. So tell us in the comments and hit that subscribe button. Show us some love. And Kolter, thanks for being here, man. I'd love to have you back on. This was a blast.
Absolutely. But I will come and visit you, because this is a frozen hellhole, and I no longer I have a snow blower. I don't even want to use that. I'm done. I'm done with the snow.
You're always welcome, brother.
Listen, and that's on tape. I have a recording
there you
of that,
go.
Just like you do.
There you go. Thanks a lot. We're out of here, guys. Thanks. Take care. See you.
The Mike C Podcast.